You spend your whole life giving, and one day you realize you gave it all to someone who forgot where they came from. My name is Henry Lawson, and I'm 72 years old. Folks around here used to call me Pop. When my daughter passed, I took in her little boy, Malik. He was just 6 years old, skinny, quiet, scared of the world. I promised him he'd never feel alone again. I taught him to ride a bike, packed his lunches, and prayed over every report card like it was gold. For years, it was just us two against the world. Until one day, success changed everything. The boy who once called me his hero stopped calling at all, and when the silence got loud enough to break me, I realized the best revenge wasn't making him remember. It was learning to live like I never forgot myself. When people talk about purpose, I think of quiet things, the kind you don't post about or tell the world. Mine began the night I lost my daughter, Angela. She was my only child, my heartbeat. It happened on a stretch of road just outside Birmingham. Rainy night, a truck lost control, and in a blink, everything I thought my life was built on was gone. She left behind a 6-year-old boy named Malik, my grandson. I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room, holding his little hand as he slept through the chaos. His tiny fingers curled around mine like he knew I wouldn't let go. That was the night I made him a promise I never said out loud. You'll never be alone, son. Not while I'm breathing. After the funeral, the house felt too big. The sound of a child changes everything. Footsteps, laughter, questions that don't have answers. Suddenly, that silence became unbearable. But Malik filled it again. He'd follow me around like my own shadow. I'd be shaving, and he'd sit on the edge of the tub asking what aftershave was. I'd tell him it was grown man lotion, and he'd laugh till his little shoulders shook. Those early days were heavy, sure, but they were the kind of heavy that gives you purpose. I wasn't a young man even then. My knees already reminded me when the weather was changing, but I got up every day for that boy. We had our routine, eggs in the morning, bus stop by 7:30, and after work we'd sit out on the porch. Me sipping coffee and him drinking chocolate milk, telling me about school, like it was the most important thing in the world. I listened to every word, because when life takes something from you, it's those small moments that start to stitch you back together. Money was tight. I worked as a mechanic most of my life, retired once already, but I went back part-time after Angela died. Folks said I didn't have to, said there were programs to help, but pride's a hard thing to shake when you're from the South. And more than that, I wanted Malik to know the value of work. I wanted him to see that love isn't always loud or fancy. Sometimes it's showing up even when you're tired. He was smart, that boy. Always had a curious mind. Took apart my old radio once just to see what made it sing. Took me 3 hours to put it back together. But I didn't even mind. Watching him learn was like watching Angela all over again. She used to do the same. Ask 1,000 questions. Take things apart just to see how they worked. There were moments I'd catch him making that same expression she used to make. Head tilted, tongue pressed to his cheek when he was focused. That's when it hit me most. She lived through him. When he started high school, things got real. He told me he wanted to go to college, said he wanted to make something of himself. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew I'd have to dig deep. I started selling things. My old fishing boat, my coin collection, even my late wife's china set that had been sitting in the cabinet for years. Those things didn't mean as much to me anymore. Malik did. Every dollar I saved went into a fund with his name on it. One night, he came home with a letter in his hand, his acceptance to the University of Georgia. He ran up to me holding that paper like it was a trophy. I remember his voice shaking as he said, "Pop, I did it." I hugged him so tight I thought my arms might break him. That night, I sat on the porch long after he went to bed. The crickets humming, the air thick and warm. I thanked God for giving me one more reason to keep going. The day we packed up the truck to take him to college, I tried to hide the ache in my chest. He was excited, buzzing with plans and big dreams. I just kept nodding, smiling, pretending I wasn't already missing him. We drove the 4 hours in near silence, except for him humming along to the radio. When we pulled up to that campus, I swear I'd never seen him so alive. The way he looked around, like he could already see his future unfolding there. I helped him carry boxes up to that tiny dorm room, pretending not to notice the other parents. Young, polished, college-educated, shaking hands, trading phone numbers. I was just an old man in work boots and a faded denim shirt. But when Malik looked back and said, "Pop, thanks for everything," none of that mattered. I just nodded and told him, "Make me proud." Driving home was harder than I expected. The truck felt too quiet. His smell was still in the air, soap and that cologne he liked too much. I passed the same diner we'd always stop at for pie and coffee, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. That night when I got back to the house, I set 2 plates out by habit, then realized there was no one else coming. The chair across from me stayed empty, but the emptiness wasn't loneliness yet. Not then, it was pride. Every call from him made my heart feel full again. He'd tell me about his classes, his friends, the city lights. I didn't understand half of what he was studying, something with computers, but I pretended I did. I just liked hearing his voice. Sometimes I'd sit by the phone after hanging up, smiling like a fool, whispering, "That's my boy." When graduation day came, I wore my best suit. It was old, a little tight, but I didn't care. I sat in the crowd surrounded by thousands of people, the sun beating down on us. When they called his name, Malik Lawson, I stood up before anyone else, clapping so hard my hands stung. He crossed that stage with that easy confidence I'd always seen in him. For a moment, I swear he looked right at me and smiled. Maybe I imagined it, but it didn't matter. After the ceremony, I waited by the steps, holding my camera, sweating through my shirt, but smiling like a fool. It took him a while to find me in that crowd. When he did, he hugged me, quickly, like people were watching, but it was enough. "Pop," he said. "We did it." Those words sat in my chest like sunlight. We did it, not I. That night we went out to dinner. He was surrounded by friends, young and loud, full of energy and plans. I didn't understand their jokes, but I laughed anyway. He kept checking his phone and I didn't mind. That's how young folks are now. I just sat there, watching him, thinking how far he'd come, thinking how worth it all the sacrifices were. When the night was over, I dropped him off at a small apartment he'd rented for the summer. He hugged me one last time and said, "I'll call you tomorrow, Pop." I nodded, proud and tired. The drive home felt long again, but this time I wasn't sad. I felt complete. I didn't know then that tomorrow would turn into weeks. That weeks would turn into months. I didn't know the calls would start coming less often, or that I'd have to remind him when my birthday came around. I didn't know success could make a person forget where they came from. Back then, I was just a proud old man in the stands, clapping for the boy he raised, believing love and loyalty would last forever. And if I had known what was coming, I still would have raised him the same way, because sometimes, loving someone right doesn't guarantee they'll remember, but it guarantees you can live with yourself when they don't. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of learning to let go. When Malik got the job offer in Atlanta, I could hear the excitement in his voice through the phone. He called late one night, couldn't wait till morning. "Pop," he said, "they want me to start next month. Full benefits, good salary, and get this, they're flying me out for orientation." I smiled even though my chest tightened. You spend your life praying your kids and grandkids will have more than you did, but you never think about what more might take from you. I told him I was proud, that his mama would have been too. I meant every word, but after we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long while, the crickets singing, the night thick with that Alabama humidity. It hit me then. The house would be quiet again. That boy's laughter had filled it for years. I didn't realize until that moment how much noise love makes when it's around, and how deep the silence gets when it leaves. The first few weeks after he moved, he called every Sunday. Just like clockwork, he'd tell me about the city, the tall buildings, the traffic, the food trucks, the way people move fast out there. He'd laugh about his coworkers, talk about how his boss liked him. He even told me, "Pop, You should come visit sometime. I said maybe I would, though we both knew I probably wouldn't. Big cities never suited me much. I liked places where people waved back. Those calls were my favorite part of the week. I'd sit by the phone all morning, making sure the battery was full, making sure I didn't miss it. When it rang, I'd take a deep breath before answering, just to keep my voice steady. He'd talk and I'd listen. Sometimes I didn't even say much, just let him fill the silence. That's what love is, I think. Listening without needing to be heard. Then the calls started coming every few weeks. He'd say, "Work's been crazy, Pop," or "I've been meaning to call." I told him it was fine, that I understood. But I still found myself checking that phone more than I should have, like a habit I couldn't break. Every buzz made my heart skip. Every silence lasted longer than the last. A few months later, he called to say he'd be visiting for a weekend. "I'm bringing someone special," he said. His voice had that grin in it, the kind people get when they're proud of something new. I didn't ask too many questions. I was just happy he was coming home. I spent that week getting the house ready. Polished the old floors, fixed the screen door that always stuck, even made his favorite peach cobbler. The morning he arrived, I stood by the window like a fool, waiting to see that silver car pull up. When it finally did, I swear my heart felt 20 years younger. He got out wearing a suit, not a church suit, one of those city ones, slim and sharp, the kind that costs more than my truck. And beside him was a young woman, tall and elegant, the kind who looked like she'd never known a day of hard work. She wore perfume that filled the whole porch before they even made it inside. "Pop, this is Jasmine," he said, his arm around her. She gave me a polite smile, quick and shallow, like she was checking something off a list. I offered my hand. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." She looked around the house as if her eyes couldn't decide where to land. "So, this is where you grew up?" she asked Malik, brushing her nails along the old wooden door frame. He chuckled, nervous. "Yeah, it's a little different from the city." I just smiled, trying to keep things light. "Ain't much, but it's home." We sat in the living room and I poured sweet tea like always. She took one sip and set the glass down slow, like she was trying not to offend anyone. Malik noticed and said, "Pop, you ever think about remodeling? Maybe something a little more modern?" That one caught me off guard. I laughed it off. "Well, son, the walls don't leak and the roof still stands." "That's modern enough for me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I saw it then, the distance. It wasn't that he didn't love me. It's just that he was starting to see the world differently, and somehow I didn't fit in that new picture anymore. Dinner was quiet. I made roast and mashed potatoes, same as always. Jasmine picked at her plate, scrolling on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Malik talked about work, new projects, big clients. I nodded in all the right places, though I didn't understand half of it. When the night ended, I offered them the guest room, but they said they'd booked a hotel just for comfort. I smiled and said that was fine. After they left, I sat in that same spot at the table for a long while. The food had gone cold, the clock ticking loud in the silence. I looked at their empty glasses, half drunk, and thought about how much effort it takes to pretend everything's still the same. The next day, they came by again before heading out. Jasmine gave me a hug, one of those quick ones, more air than warmth. Malik said, "Pop, I'll call you this week, okay?" "Sure thing, son," I said. I watched their car disappear down the road. The dust settled quick, but something inside me didn't. Weeks went by. No call, no message. I told myself he was busy. New job, new life, all that. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just busyness. It was distance. Not the kind you measure in miles, but in change. He finally called one Sunday afternoon. His voice was bright, but there was a rush underneath it. "Pop, how are you?" Been meaning to check in. I told him I was fine, that the garden was coming along. He said, "That's good. Hey, listen, I might not make it down for the holidays this year. Jasmine's family is doing a big thing upstate." "Oh, sure," I said quietly. "Family's important." "Yeah, we'll plan something soon, though," he added, Promises are funny things. They sound good when you say them, but when they echo in an empty house, they lose their shape. I started noticing little things after that. His social media, pictures of fancy dinners, vacations, new cars. Not once did I see my name mentioned. In interviews, he'd talk about how hard he worked to make it on his own. Self-made, they called him. I wanted to be proud. I really did. But sometimes, pride and pain look a lot alike when they sit in your chest. One night, I got a message from an old friend. "Hey Henry," it said. "Saw Malik on the news. He's doing great, huh?" I smiled and typed back, "He's doing fine. Always knew he would." But my hands shook as I sent it. A few months later, Malik showed up again. No call this time. Just knocked on my door one Saturday morning. I opened it, surprised, happy even. But the smile faded when I saw the look on his face. He wasn't visiting. He was inspecting. He walked through the house like a realtor, touching things, making comments. "Pop, you really should upgrade this furniture. You deserve better. Maybe sell the place and move closer to the city." I just nodded. "I like it here. Got all I need." Jasmine wasn't with him that time, but her shadow was. He talked like her now, soft but distant, polished but hollow. He stayed for less than an hour. Before leaving, he handed me an envelope. "Just a little something," he said. "Buy yourself something nice." I opened it later, $200 inside. My stomach turned. Not because of the money, but because it felt like payment for something that didn't need paying. That night, I sat on the porch again, the same spot where I'd once listened to that boy tell me about his dreams. The stars were bright, the air smelled like rain. I thought about all the times I'd told him that love means showing up, and I wondered when he stopped believing that. I didn't feel anger, not yet. Just sadness, the kind that sits deep, quiet, and patient. I still kept the phone close, though. Still waited for the next call, the next visit, the next sign that maybe the city hadn't taken all of him. But deep down, a small voice whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. The boy I raised was still there somewhere, but the man who left my porch that night was starting to forget who made him. And I think that's when the silence between us stopped feeling like space and started feeling like loss. When I first heard about Malik buying a house, it came the way most news does in a small town, through other people's windows. Mrs. Carter from down the road waved at me and said, "Henry, did you see? Malik's house is in the paper." She showed me the glossy magazine as if it were a family album, pointing to the photo of him in a crisp jacket, smiling like the whole world belonged to him. Under the picture, the caption read, "Self-made." I turned the page slower than she did, looking for a mention of where he came from, some nod to a family that had stood behind him. There was nothing. You hear things like that, and you tell yourself you shouldn't be surprised. You tell yourself people change. Life happens. But when you raise someone from a child, and you watch them take their first steps, and you teach them how to hold a screwdriver just so, those small private lessons, they don't often show up in glossy pages. They don't usually come with captions. That was one of the first times the idea slipped into my head that maybe, somewhere along the line, the story had been rewritten. I decided to go up to the city that weekend. I didn't tell him. I wanted, foolishly perhaps, to walk into the house and see him laugh when he looked up and saw me, just like the old days. I packed a bag the night before, the way a man packs when he's trying on courage. I left the cottage while the sun was still soft and the bay smelled like low tide and salt. Driving up, I thought of the porch where he used to sit, the bike with the paint chipped on the handlebar, the way he used to hide in the closet during thunderstorms. I told myself I was going for a visit, that this was a chance to celebrate with him in person. Mostly I wanted to see him and be near him, the way people go to church, because they need to be close to something that feels right. When I reached the neighborhood, the houses were different than the ones back home. Glass and iron, sharp edges and clean lines. The street names were sleek, and the cars hummed like things that had no business on a dirt road. I parked down the block and walked up to the brownstone with my shoulders pulled in as if the air itself might judge me. There were balloons tied to the railing, and a caterer's van idling on the curb. I could hear music through the closed windows, that low city beat I've never quite learned to like. It was a party, no question. I pressed my face to the intercom and heard a woman's voice ask who I was. "Henry Lawson," I said. My name sounded small in that tiled lobby. "I'm an old friend." The woman buzzed me in. I went up the marble steps and into a world that smelled of perfume and lemon-scented polish. People moved around with the kind of ease that says money isn't something that gets in the way of living. I saw him before he saw me. Malik stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, talking with a group of people I didn't know. Men in pressed shirts and women in high heels. He looked good. He looked like the man the magazines had shown. When he turned and caught my eye, for a second his face lit up as if at a familiar sight. I felt that quick warmth and thought, there it is. He saw me. Then he excused himself and walked toward me with that same grin, but it was short and polished, the kind that fits in between a speech and a handshake. "Pop," he said, and he pulled me into a hug the way a man pulls his father into a photo. Respectful, tight, then gently released. He introduced me, fast, nervous. "Everyone, this is my grandfather, Henry. He came up for the weekend." The room clapped politely, and a few people said hello. One or two shook my hand as if I were another face in the crowd. Nobody asked where I was from. Nobody asked what I did when I wasn't in suits and glass towers. We walked through the apartment. He showed me the kitchen, state of the art, he said, where he had an island with marble and a coffee machine that looked like a small spaceship. He pointed to the framed cover of the magazine on the mantelpiece. "They did a piece on the startup I work for," he said with a pride that shone like polished chrome. "Can you believe it?" I smiled and said I could. Of course I could. I knew a little boy who used to make mud pies and brag about catching tadpoles. I knew that under every polished thing was a story that began with someone teaching him to keep trying when things didn't work out the first time. People kept coming up to him. "Sir, congratulations," they said, and he smiled and shook hands. The word "sir" landed in my ears like a small weight. I tried to laugh it off. "It's just a title," I told myself. "It means respect." But there was something in that way they said it, smooth, formal, that felt like a small, polite erasure. It was a reminder that he had moved into a space where my language wasn't the right language anymore. Someone asked for a photo with him, and they crowded around, phones up like westerns being filmed. He posed, arm around a woman who laughed and said, "You're killing it out here." They didn't look like the kinds of people who would know how to fix a child's bike chain, or how to patch a leaky roof with a bit of stubbornness and an extra tin of nails. They didn't know the small rituals of our life, the scent of my cornbread, the way I used to whistle when evening fell, the prayer we said at night with our heads bowed. Those things aren't for magazines. They don't show up on magazine covers. We slipped out to the balcony to get some air. The city spread below like a net of lights. He looked out for a moment and then turned to me. "Pop, I wish you could stay longer," he said. His voice was soft. It was the first time he'd said anything like that all night. "It's been busy." I told him I understood, and that I was glad he was doing well. He asked if I wanted anything, if I needed money for gas. He handed me an envelope the way a grandchild hands over a card, careful, slightly embarrassed by the exchange. Inside was a crisp bill. It was good money. I took it and put it in my pocket because the gesture felt like a stopgap, something to fix without needing words. Then he disappeared back into the room, called away by people who wanted to hear about his journey, as they called it. I stood on that balcony and watched him from the open door while he laughed and told the same story to strangers that he'd told me by the porch light when he was a boy. The rhythm was the same, but the audience had changed, and the rhythm rearranged itself to fit. A woman approached me and said, "You must be proud." Her voice was kind, curious. I nodded. "Yes, ma'am, he's my heart." She smiled and asked, "Where's his mother?" I swallowed and told a shortened version. "She passed some years back." Her face softened, and she patted my shoulder as if condolence might be part of a party. It felt strange, being consoled in a room meant for celebrating. Later, a neighbor from the building came over, leaning on the balcony rail. She said quietly, "I saw Malik's interview in Modern Success. They called him self-made." I forced a laugh that didn't want to come. "Self-made," I repeated. The word echoed strange and hollow. I thought back to nights when he'd curl up at my feet while I tuned a radio, to the lists of things I'd sold to pay for his tuition, to the prayer I'd said every night that he might have a life less hard than mine. Self-made is what the world said when it didn't want to look at the hands that built the ladder. The party wound down and people left in taxis and expensive cars. Malik came to the balcony one last time. "Pop," he said. "I've got to meet some people for breakfast in the morning. I'll call you soon." There was a tiredness in his voice I'd not heard before. It wasn't cruelty, not at all. It was exhaustion and the weight of expectations and a life that ran fast. I understood that, but I also understood that in the speed, some things get left behind. I left him there among his new world of lights and linen, walked back down the marble steps, and to my car in the dark street. Driving home, the city lights blurred against the windshield, and I held the steering wheel like a lifeline. I thought about how stories change when you tell them to different rooms. In the quiet of the highway, with the radio humming soft, I realized the painful truth. Malik's story had become a tale told in the present tense without the people who had made it possible. He was not denying where he came from on purpose. He was living a life that had no space for those markers anymore. When I pulled into my driveway back at the cottage, the porch light burned like a small, faithful eye. I sat in the car for a long while, the silence in the house folding around me. I thought about Angela, the way she would have rolled her eyes at my dramatics and then poured me a cup of coffee. I thought about all the times we'd sat and planned a life that would keep Malik safe. I went inside and placed the envelope on the mantel. It wasn't about the money. It hadn't been about money for a long time. It was about being recognized, and I felt, in a way that was deep and quiet, erased in plain sight. I didn't know how to say that to anyone, and at that hour there was no one to tell. So I sat down in my chair and let the quiet sit with me, heavy as the tide. I didn't call him that night. I didn't text. I sat with the image of him laughing in the city and the echo of strangers cheering his name. I felt a small, acute ache like a tooth that needed pulling. It hurt, but it was honest, and sometimes, honest hurt is where you begin to understand what you need to do next. The cough started as a little thing, an annoyance I told myself to forget. You get little aches and groans when you're 72. That's part of the bargain. But one morning, after I'd been up fixing the leaky screen door, I walked into the kitchen and felt a weight in my chest, like someone had set a small bag of stones on it. I sat down at the table and drank my coffee cold. The phone was on the counter, and for a minute I watched it like a thing that belonged to someone else. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sirens, no urgent hands. It was the ordinary, slow way life tells you to pay attention. I went to the clinic the next day, because that's what you do when you don't want to be foolish about something that might be small and turns out to be important. The nurse took my vitals like she had all the time in the world, and the doctor said some serious-sounding things. We should run some tests. Let's monitor this. And then he put a warm hand on my shoulder and said, "You take care of this. Henry, you go slow." Driving home from the clinic, I thought of Angela. She used to say, "You worry too much," in that teasing way that made me laugh, and I imagined her rolling her eyes at me now. I put my hand on the steering wheel like I was feeling for a pulse there, for the steady hum of the road to reassure me that I was still here, still moving. That night, I sat on the porch with the evening air thick around me and wrote Malik a message. Not a long one, just to let him know I'd had some tests, that I was okay, and that I loved him. I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want him to drop the life he'd built like a hot pan, but I wanted him to know. I typed slowly, reading the words twice before I hit send, because sometimes words feel more fragile in a small screen than they do in real life. A little while later, the reply came. It was short, clipped the way so many of his messages had become. "Pop, I'm in meetings all week. Let's talk soon." I read it 3 times, like I was trying to find the rest of the sentence hidden under those few words. Then I smiled, not at the content, but at the old habit of waiting for the someone you love to bend time for you, even for a moment. I'd been waiting so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. There was a clarity after that smile, a clean feeling that was less about bitterness and more about some unburdening. I thought about how many times I'd rearranged my life around the anticipation of a phone call, an edited life that moved in pauses between ringtones. I thought about the nights I had sat up composing the right words to say when he called, the way I'd held back complaints so his nights wouldn't fill with guilt. It had been a kind of living that honored him. It was also a living that left very little for me. The next morning I called the realtor. She was a young woman with quick hands and an easier laugh than some folks in town. "You sure about selling?" she asked, as if she could see me over the phone. I was sure in a way I hadn't been in a long time. Selling the house felt less like an abandonment and more like a release. That house had been a map of praise and grief. It held the echo of Angela's laughter and the shadow of the day we buried her. I had given that place every memory I could afford to give it, but now the memories needed a different kind of space. Packing began the way it always does when you start to make space for something new, by touching things and remembering what they once were. I found myself holding the chipped mug that Angela had used when she was a teenager and thinking of how she always left a small drip of coffee on the saucer. I packed the quilts one by one, folding each with a care that felt like prayer. I took the photographs down from the mantel and wrapped them in newspaper, fingers lingering over the faces. Angela's crooked smile, Malik at 6 with a missing tooth, my own younger face, less tired. Some things I could not let go of. Harold's pocket watch that had stopped, the day he died, and I wrapped it carefully and placed it in a shoebox that I'd set aside. Decided early on not to throw everything away or sell, every little trinket for a quick buck. Some things you donate because they might be of use to someone else. Some things you give away because they carry a story that should continue in another house. I called the church and asked if there were families who might need dishes and bed linens. The pastor came by with his old truck and helped me load quilts and casseroles into the back. We sat in the kitchen afterwards and drank the bitter instant coffee that comes in paper cups, and he listened as I told him. In the soft way you tell the truth to people who have known you a long time. A few neighbors came by. Mrs. Carter brought a pie and a dish towel that smelled like lemon. "You'll miss these floors, Henry," she said, shaking her head. "But it'll be good for you." I told them I thought so too. The children from down the lane waved as I walked boxes out to the curb. A little girl tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Mr. Henry, are you moving far?" I knelt down and told her about the lake, about the ducks, about the little store that sold the best ginger snaps. Her eyes widened like she was starting to understand there were worlds beyond the lane. Selling the house was more paperwork than I expected. We signed forms and ironed out details with the kind of careful attention that felt like a ritual. The realtor told me the new owners were a young family who wanted a cozy place for their children. I liked that thought. It felt right that laughter would come back into those rooms. The check from the sale was less important than the fact that I had let the house go willingly. I gave some money to a local scholarship in Angela's name and set aside a small amount for myself, enough to live comfortably, without needing to worry about penny pinching. At the end of my days, the day of the move felt like a small funeral and a small parade at the same time. I stood on the porch one last time and touched the banister where my hand always rested. I said a quiet goodbye that only the air could hear, and then walked into the truck with exactness, as if I were obeying an instruction about moving forward. I had been to the lake years ago with Angela and Malik, when Malik was small, and we'd rented a cabin for a weekend. I remembered the shore from then, the way the water lapped against the wood, the reeds whispering in the wind, the smell of fish and late summer. I'd always liked the way time seemed to unfold there, slow and patient, like the world could afford to be kind. I thought of that when I signed for the small cottage on the edge of town. a modest place with a screened-in porch and a narrow path down to the water. It wasn't a big house, but it had room for a chair and a patch of earth where I could plant rosemary and a rose bush. Driving down the highway toward the lake, I felt oddly lighter. The road was generous, and the afternoon sun lay across the hood of the car like a shawl. I had fewer things in the back of the truck than I expected, just the necessities and a few boxes I'd been unable to part with. Passing through the small town felt like being folded into a new paragraph of a book, where the sentence lengths were gentler. The cottage smelled like cedar and old books when I first opened the door. It had a narrow kitchen with a window that looked out over the water. I set my boxes down and listened. For a little while there was only the sound of the water and the house settling into itself. I put on a kettle and made tea, and when I sat on the porch and looked at the lake, it felt like stepping into a world that had been waiting for me to notice it. People in the town were easy, the way people are when they've learnt not to rush. I walked into Mrs. Green's store and bought a loaf of bread, and she wrapped it in brown paper like it was something special. Later, a young man came by and asked if I'd like to take a shift teaching at the youth center. "We got a few boys who like to work with their hands," he said. "You know how to teach that." I told him I might, and I liked that the idea sat like a small promise on my tongue. I made the cottage my own with little things. A potted rosemary by the sink, a quilt tossed over the back of a chair, a small shelf for the books I'd been saving. I planted a small row of flowers, petunias mostly, because they're stubborn and keep coming back. The first morning I woke up on that porch. I made coffee and watched the mist lift off the lake. A canoe slipped by like a slow thought. There was a peace to it that had nothing to do with forgetting, and everything to do with choosing. People called from time to time. Malik's messages still came, usually quick and clipped. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I let it sit as a favor to myself to not be available every moment. I found I liked the rhythm of small mornings, walking down to the shore, greeting the women sweeping the church steps, volunteering to fix a lawnmower at the youth center. I liked the way my hands could be busy without feeling like I was losing something by being occupied. What surprised me was how the silence, the one I'd once dreaded so badly, turned into a thing that could teach me things. It taught me that being alone is not the same as being lonely. It taught me that quiet can be full, the way a pot of gumbo brews slowly on the stove until it's rich and warm. It taught me the small comfort of being content with a single plate at a table, and the pleasure of making a meal for the neighbors because it felt right, not because I was trying to fill an empty space in someone else's life. At night, I sit on the porch and watch fireflies like someone counting blessings by light. The lake breathes in and out, a steady sound. Sometimes I think of Malik and the life he's building, and my chest tightens the way it did in that hospital room years ago. But more and more, that tightness eases into something steady. Acceptance, maybe, or the quiet knowledge that I have a right to be here too, in my own life. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if Malik will come back around, or if he will call more or less. I do know this. When I sold the house and moved to the lake, I did it not to punish him, but to make room in my days for the life I'd set aside for someone else. And in that room, I began to find parts of myself I'd forgotten how to be. When I first moved to the lake, the days felt longer than they should have. Mornings came quiet, and the evenings seemed to stretch out like they were testing how much silence a man could stand. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching the mist lift off the water, and think about how strange it felt to have nowhere I had to be. Freedom, they call it, but freedom after a life of routine feels a lot like drifting. Peaceful, but a little too wide. Then one afternoon, I walked down to the general store to pick up a new rake. A flyer was tacked up near the counter. Volunteers needed at Riverbend Youth Center, teaching life skills to local boys. I must have stared at it longer than I realized, because the owner, old Mrs. Green, said, "Henry, that sounds like something you'd be good at. Those boys could use a steady hand." I laughed softly, told her I hadn't worked with kids in years. She shrugged. "Well, you raised one right, didn't you?" I nodded but didn't say anything. Right felt like a stretch these days. Still, I took the flyer, folded it twice, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, I walked down to the youth center. It was an old brick building, worn around the edges but still standing proud. The sign out front leaned a little, and the paint had peeled off the door frame, but the sound inside was full of life. Kids laughing, a basketball thumping against the floor, sneakers squeaking. It reminded me of the noise Malik used to make running through the house, knocking things over just to see if I'd notice. A woman named Carla greeted me at the front desk. "You must be Mr. Lawson," she said, smiling like she'd already decided to like me. "We could sure use another pair of hands." "You good with tools?" I chuckled. "I've spent most of my life fixing things that weren't supposed to break." "So yeah, I'd say I'm handy." She led me out back to a small garage that smelled like motor oil and summer heat. There were a few old bikes leaned against the wall, some missing chains, others missing pedals. A handful of boys were sitting on overturned buckets, watching one of the volunteers patch a tire. Carla said, "These fellas could use a teacher." I looked around and saw their faces, some curious, some distant, the way kids look when they've learned not to expect much from adults. I clapped my hands together. "All right, fellas," I said. "Who here knows the difference between a wrench and a prayer?" That got a few laughs. One of the older boys, maybe 15, raised his hand. "What's the answer?" he asked. "Both'll fix something if you use 'em right," I said, and that broke the ice. Over the next few weeks, I started coming by every afternoon. I showed them how to loosen bolts without stripping them, how to check tire pressure, how to clean a chain till it shines. It wasn't just about bikes. It was about rhythm, the small patience it takes to fix what's been neglected. I didn't preach much. I just worked and let them watch until their hands started to reach for the tools themselves. One boy, named Marcus, took to it quicker than the rest. Reminded me of Malik when he was little, curious, quick to smile, and quicker to hide it when someone praised him. He'd ask a dozen questions, then stay after to keep working long after the others had gone home. One day, he looked up from the bike he was fixing and said, "Mr. Henry, how come you come here every day?" "Don't you get bored?" I thought about it for a moment and said, "I used to think fixing things was about getting them back to how they were. But now I think it's just about seeing if they can still run. Maybe that's enough." He nodded like he understood more than I meant to say. Kids have a way of hearing the things you don't put into words. It didn't take long for the boys to start calling me Granddad. The first time it happened, I almost didn't respond. Then one of them, Jalen, the youngest, said, "You don't mind, do you?" "You kinda act like one," I told him. "Long as you don't expect candy every time you see me, I'm fine with it." But inside, something warm broke open. It had been a long time since anyone had called me something that carried love in it. I started to laugh again. Real laughs, not the polite kind you give strangers or the ones you use to cover the ache. These were full laughs, the kind that come from your belly and shake the dust off your heart. We'd tease each other, trade stories, share snacks. They'd bring me music they liked, half of which I didn't understand, and I'd tell them about songs that played on real instruments. We'd argue over which was better and end up laughing anyway. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking how strange it was that I'd found joy in a place that didn't even exist in my plans. I came to that lake thinking I was done giving, but here I was, handing out small pieces of myself like spare parts. And somehow I was the one being repaired. The folks in town started noticing too. The cashier at the grocery store said, "Those kids talk about you like you walk on water." I told her, "Nah, I just stand in the shallow parts so they can see it's safe." One afternoon, Carla asked if I wanted to speak at the community dinner. "Just say a few words about what you do here," she said. Public speaking wasn't ever my thing, but I agreed. When the day came, I stood at the little podium in the gym, looking out at the faces of neighbors, kids, and a few proud parents. The boys sat together, elbowing each other, grinning. I cleared my throat. "I don't have much to say," I began. "I spent a long time thinking family was about who shared your blood. Turns out it's more about who shares your time. These boys, I pointed to the row of them, they remind me that giving ain't supposed to hurt. It's just supposed to be honest. There was a soft hush in the room after that, the kind that feels like people are listening with their hearts instead of their ears. When I got home that night, I sat on my porch with the stars scattered above the lake. My phone buzzed just once. It was Malik, a simple text. "Hey Pop, been thinking about you. Hope you're good." For the first time, I didn't rush to reply. I didn't read it twice, didn't look for hidden meaning in the smallness of his words. I just smiled. He was living his life, and so was I. Maybe that was enough. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slipping through the curtains and the smell of dew on the grass. I brewed coffee, put on the radio, and got ready to head to the center. On my way out, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back wasn't the same one who'd left that old house. His shoulders were straighter, eyes calmer. He looked like someone who had remembered how to breathe. When folks in town asked if I had family, I'd smile and say, I had one, and I still do, just not by blood. Because the truth was, I'd stopped chasing what was gone. Somewhere between the laughter of those boys and the quiet of the lake, I'd found what I was missing, not the people I'd lost, but the part of myself I'd given away trying to keep them. And when I sat there on the bench outside the youth center, watching the boys ride their fixed bikes down the gravel road, kicking up dust in the golden light, I thought to myself, this right here is enough. The ache in my chest wasn't gone, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened into something like gratitude. I didn't need Malik's calls to remind me who I was. I didn't need the world's applause to feel proud. I had built something new, quiet, steady, and good. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't just living for memory. I was living again. The day Malik came back to the youth center, it looked like any other. Hot coffee on the counter, a kid's bike propped against the bench with a chain that needed a little coaxing, the steady thump of a basketball from the gym. I was teaching a boy how to true a bent rim when Carla waved me over. "Henry, you might want to see who's out front," she said, and there was that small note in her voice that lets you know surprise is coming. I went out and found him standing there, sleeves rolled up over his suit shirt, looking like the man in the magazine, but not the same. He had the same jawline, the same way he chewed a word before he said it, but his shoulders were narrower, like they'd been carrying things no one should have to carry. When he saw me, his face changed in a way that made my breath catch. For a single instant, I saw the boy who used to hide under blankets during storms. Then the moment slid away and the man he'd become took his place. "Pop," he said. His voice was soft, a little cracked. He stepped forward and hugged me the way a man hugs when he's trying to get something back that he's not sure he can find. I felt the pressure of his arms, a quickness then a slackening. He pulled away and looked at me like someone seeing an old photograph come to life. "How you been?" I asked, because that's what you do when a person stands in your doorway. You start with the small things and let the rest come if it wants to. He looked at the bikes, the boys working, the way the place hummed, and then at me. "I saw what you've been doing," he said. He stopped, swallowed. "I should have been here, Pop. I should have been here." There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for and dreading in the same breath. It came out like a confession and a request tangled together. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or for a way back. He was telling me finally that he'd noticed what I'd been doing, that the life I'd built apart from him had meaning, and that maybe he missed it. I looked at him, and I thought about all the times I'd sat waiting for these exact words. Waiting because I wanted him to understand, or admit, or blame himself so I could feel vindicated. But the years teach you things you don't expect. You learn that the need for someone to apologize is smaller than the need to live fully. You learn that making a person feel small, by shouting or shaming, won't stitch them back together. So I did what felt right then. I smiled and invited him to sit. I poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs like I always do, the hands of a man whose life has been measured in simple rituals. I handed him a mug and watched steam curl up between us. For a second, we just breathed the warm air together. Outside, a boy rang a bell because his tire was fixed. Laughter rose and fell in comfortable waves. "How's the weather up there?" I asked him. It sounds silly now, but it was a gentle opener. Asking about the weather is a safe place to start when words are heavy. He blinked, looked surprised, then laughed a little. "It's busy," he said. "Cloudy, lots of meetings." "Cloudy's good," I said. "Rain means the garden will grow." He looked at me, and his eyes filled. "Pop, I've been running so fast I didn't notice where I left the pieces." His voice broke, small and honest, and something inside my chest did that soft fold it does when you hear someone finally tell the truth to themselves. He didn't kneel or beg. He didn't need to. He sat there like a tired man and let the tears come. Quiet, unexpected. The kind that don't drum on the table but seep through to the chair. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. There was a shame in him, and a relief, and a longing all braided up, and the room felt like it could hold it. People talk about revenge like it's a thing you set out to do. Plan, execute, and enjoy. I'll tell you what I learned. The sweetest, most lasting revenge is the one that doesn't cost you your dignity. It's the calm you let into your life when you stop letting someone else's choices decide your small joys. It's the decision to stop paying attention to the things that make you small. It's the slow work of building a life gentle enough to hold you, even when others leave. Malik sniffed and wiped his face. "I don't know how to say it right," he said. "I'm sorry, Pop, for leaving, for not calling enough, for—" He stopped again, because words are fragile when they're leaned on too hard. "You don't need to make me pay for not being there," I told him. "You were doing what you had to do. I never wanted you to feel like you owed me. I wanted you to live. That's the truth of it. I wanted him to be free, and freedom doesn't always come with memory." He looked at me like a man learning a new language, the language of mercy without demand. "I thought if I made it, I could fix everything," he said. "I thought success would be a bridge back, but I didn't know how to cross it without trampling what was already there." "That's the hard part," I said. "Bridges take two people to cross." We sat a while longer. I told him about the kids, how Marcus finally learned to tighten a loose spoke without bending the rim, how Jalen was saving up for art supplies. I told him about the little recipes I'd been trying, the rosemary that finally took root by the porch. He listened the way younger ears listen when they're hungry for something honest. It wasn't the grand reunion some stories promise. It was quieter. Two people sharing the same table without the need to relitigate the past. When he stood to leave, he hugged me again, longer this time. "I'll be around," he said. "I mean it." The words were small, but they held a weight I felt in my bones. He didn't promise the moon. He offered presents. For now, that was enough. After he left, I went down to the dock at sunset like I always do. The sky that evening was a slow watercolor, pinks and oranges folding into deep indigo. Kids from the center were chasing each other along the shoreline, their laughter skimming the water like pebbles. I sat on the edge of the dock and dangled my feet in the coolness, watching the ripples spread and fade. The lake had a way of reflecting back only what you could bear to look at, and that night it showed me a line of light like a quiet path. I thought about revenge in one long, clear breath. I thought about all the things I could have done. Letters written in anger, phone calls with accusations, public scenes that would have made a point but cost me sleep and peace. I thought about the satisfaction people advertise in getting even, and I felt a small pity for the hunger that drives it. There is a hollowness in payback that never fills you. It's noisy and bright for a moment, and then it leaves the same hole for you to stare into. What's quieter and more stubborn than revenge is peace. Peace doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't demand recompense. It simply sits in your life and makes room for other things. A bowl of soup for a neighbor, an afternoon teaching a boy how to change his tire, the slow planting of a small rose bush that may never bloom in a season you see. Peace is a choice. It's the way you answer the phone when the voice on the other end is hurried and busy, and you choose not to let their absence determine your dignity. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Husband, Father, mechanic, pop. Now they call me Granddad at the center, and I like the sound of that. It rolls out of children's mouths honest and unstaged. It doesn't come with conditions or expectations. It's simply a name that means I belong somewhere. The sun slid down until the first stars pricked the sky. I sat there watching the children run and laughing to myself, because I remembered the boy Malik used to be. And I was grateful for the man he was trying to become. I didn't need him to kneel or apologize in a way that would make me the victor in a story. I didn't want to be a trophy he carried around to prove he hadn't forgotten. I wanted him to come back, because he wanted to be near something that made his life whole. Sometimes, when I feel the old ache, that peculiar empty place where waiting used to live, I breathe deep and tell myself the truth. You didn't lose by letting go. You gained a life that fits you. You learned how to be present without waiting for someone else to give you permission. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.